Aberdeen, Washington, June 1993. Kurt Cobain sat in his tour bus outside Aberdeen High School, staring at the building where teachers had once told him he'd never amount to anything. Now, he was being invited back to give the graduation speech, but nobody knew what he was about to say would make half the audience walk out. It was 10 years since Kurt had dropped out of this same school. A decade since Principal Donald Hayes had called him into his office and said those words that still burned. "You're wasting everyone's time here, Cobain. You'll never be anything but a burden on society." Kurt had walked out that day with $37 in his pocket and a guitar with 2 broken strings. Now, Nirvana was the biggest band in the world. Teen Spirit had sold 30 million copies, and Aberdeen High School wanted him back to inspire their graduating class. The invitation had arrived 3 months earlier. A formal letter from the school board wanting Kurt Cobain, their most famous alumni, to deliver the commencement address. Kurt had laughed when he first read it. Then he'd gotten angry. Then he'd done something nobody expected. He called the school and said yes. But here's what nobody talks about. Kurt didn't agree to give them the speech they wanted. He agreed to give them the speech they needed. Courtney had tried to talk him out of it. "Baby, why would you go back there? Those people treated you like garbage." But Kurt had his reasons. He'd been getting letters from kids in Aberdeen, teenagers who felt exactly like he had felt. Trapped, misunderstood, told they were worthless by teachers who now wanted to celebrate his success. Those kids needed to hear something real, and not some sanitized success story. They needed the truth about surviving when everyone tells you that you're not good enough. The week before the ceremony, Kurt did something unusual. He visited Aberdeen without telling anyone. He drove through the neighborhoods where he'd been homeless at 17, walked past the houses of friends whose parents had refused to let him stay because he was dirty, broke, unreliable. Sat on the Young Street Bridge where he'd slept under newspapers during winter, wondering if he'd freeze to death before morning. He stopped at the Taco Bell where he'd worked for 6 weeks until the manager fired him for showing up with bleached hair. Drove past the pawn shop where he'd sold his first guitar for $40 to buy food. Stood outside the apartment building where his mom had told him to leave and never come back. He wanted to remember everything: the anger, the pain, the humiliation of being 17 and homeless in a town where everyone knew you were failing. Because that's what he was going to talk about at graduation. Not the sanitized version where hard work and perseverance lead to success. The real version where anger becomes fuel and rejection becomes armor, and the people who hurt you accidentally give you exactly what you need to survive. On graduation day, the gymnasium was packed with 2,000 people, graduating seniors in front, parents behind them, and in back, administrators who had never supported Kurt but were thrilled to claim him now. Kurt arrived 20 minutes early, ripped jeans, faded Sonic Youth t-shirt, the same thrift store cardigan he'd worn to the MTV Awards. No suit, no tie. A no concession to what they expected Kurt Cobain, the inspirational speaker, to look like. The current principal, Mrs. Anderson, met him at the door. She was nervous, Kurt could tell, probably worried he'd show up high or drunk or cause some kind of scene that would embarrass the school. But here's what nobody expected. Kurt was completely sober, clear-eyed, focused. He'd even written his speech by hand, 12 pages in his cramped, angular handwriting that looked like it had been carved into the paper. Mrs. Anderson tried to review it with him. "Just to make sure it hits the right notes," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know, something uplifting for the kids." Kurt folded the pages and put them back in his cardigan pocket. "You'll hear it when everyone else does." The ceremony started like every graduation. And national anthem, welcome remarks. Then Mrs. Anderson introduced Kurt. She gave a speech about how Aberdeen High had always supported artistic expression, how proud they were to have contributed to Kurt's development. Kurt sat listening to this revisionist history, his jaw getting tighter with every lie. When she finally said, "Please welcome Kurt Cobain," the gymnasium erupted, students screaming, parents cheering, teachers on their feet. Kurt walked to the microphone, his heart pounding. He looked out at 2,000 faces, and in the faculty section, teachers who had once written him off, now smiling like they'd always believed in him. He pulled out his speech, unfolded it, looked at the first page, then folded it back up and put it away. "Thanks for that introduction," Kurt said. "Though I have to say, it's interesting to hear about how much this school supported my artistic expression, because I don't remember it that way." The applause died. People shifted uncomfortably. I remember being told I was wasting everyone's time. I remember teachers who said my music was noise and my art was garbage. I remember guidance counselors who suggested I drop out because I was bringing down test score averages. The gymnasium went silent. I remember sitting in Mr. Fletcher's English class, in that desk by the window, being told by an adult I was supposed to trust that I would never be anything, that I should give up on music, that I should accept my place at the bottom and stop bothering people who actually had futures. I remember the guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, who told my mother I was unteachable, who suggested I should look into vocational programs for students with limited potential. I was 16 years old, and the adults whose job it was to help me were telling me I was worthless. Faculty members were looking at the floor. Mrs. Anderson was gesturing at Kurt, trying to get him to change direction, but Kurt's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "So I want to talk to the students here today, not about how great this school is, not about how if you work hard everything will work out. Because that's not true." He looked directly at the seniors. "If you're sitting here feeling like you don't fit in, like nobody understands you, like adults have written you off, I want you to know something. They're wrong." Parents were getting uncomfortable. This wasn't the inspirational message they'd expected. And I didn't become successful because this school prepared me well. I became successful in spite of this place, in spite of teachers who couldn't see past their narrow definitions of success, in spite of a system that punishes anything different. A few parents started whispering. One teacher stood up looking like she might leave, but the students were riveted, especially the ones in back, the ones who looked like Kurt had looked. You know what actually helped me? Being rejected, being told I wasn't good enough, being pushed out and treated like garbage. Because it made me angry enough to prove everyone wrong. Anger became my fuel. Now some of you are thinking, that's terrible advice. You can't tell kids to be angry. Kurt shrugged. But I'm not here to tell you what you're supposed to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth. The truth is that some of you are going to struggle. You're going to work minimum wage jobs, live in your car, feel like everyone who said you'd fail was right. And in those moments, you have two choices: believe them and give up, or use that anger, that rejection, that pain, and turn it into something. Mrs. Anderson stood up and walked toward the podium, but Kurt kept talking. I lived under the Young Street Bridge. I stole food. I slept in hospital waiting rooms because they were warm. And every single day I thought about the people in this building who told me I'd never be anything, and I promised myself I would prove them wrong. Mrs. Anderson reached Kurt. "Mr. Cobain, this isn't appropriate for a graduation ceremony." Kurt looked at her, then back at the students. "You know what's not appropriate? Lying to these kids about how the world works, telling them everyone who works hard succeeds. Some people work hard their entire lives and still struggle. Life isn't fair. And pretending it is doesn't help anyone." About 30 people stood up and walked out, older parents and faculty members, but the students stayed, every single one. Kurt waited until the door closed. Then he smiled. "Okay, now I can talk to the people who actually need to hear this." The crowd laughed nervously. To the students who feel different, who don't fit in, who've been told you're too weird or too quiet or too loud, your differentness is not a flaw. It's the most valuable thing about you. I'm not going to tell you being different is easy. You're going to be lonely, misunderstood, question whether it's worth it. But the pain of being yourself is temporary, and the pain of pretending to be someone else lasts forever. Some students were crying, recognition tears. I'm not successful because I'm special. I'm successful because I refuse to believe the people who said I wasn't, and you can do the same thing. If success for you is working in a bookstore and writing poetry at night, that's valid. If success is staying in Aberdeen and raising a family, that's valid. If success is getting out and never looking back, that's valid too. The only invalid choice is letting someone else tell you what your life should look like. Kurt looked at the remaining faculty and to the teachers who stayed. Thank you. Maybe you'll think about the students you have now who remind you of me. Maybe you'll understand your job isn't to make them fit in. It's to help them survive long enough to figure out who they are. The gymnasium was silent. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. You wanted me to say Aberdeen High shaped me, that my teachers inspired me, but that would be a lie. I succeeded because I survived this place, and for the students who feel like I felt, you can survive it too. Your pain is real, your anger is valid, your differentness is your strength. And to the administrators who invited me hoping I'd tell a nice story about small-town values, I'm sorry I disappointed you. But I'm not sorry enough to lie to these kids just to make you feel good. Kurt stepped away from the podium. 5 seconds of silence, then one student started clapping, then another. Within moments, the entire graduating class was on their feet, cheering with an intensity that shook the building. But here's what happened next. Kurt stayed in the parking lot for 3 hours. Students came up one after another, some crying, some angry, all needing to talk. A girl named Sarah said she was dropping out because her art teacher said she had no talent. Kurt spent 20 minutes convincing her to ignore that teacher. A boy named Michael said his parents wanted him to take over the family business, but he wanted to study marine biology. Kurt told him that disappointing your parents is sometimes necessary to become yourself. Kids who felt exactly like Kurt had felt came to him looking for permission to be themselves. And Kurt gave it, not through motivational speeches, through real talk about real struggle and real survival. The newspaper headline next day read, "Cobain graduation speech controversial." The article quoted offended parents who said Kurt had been negative and inappropriate, school board members who felt he had disrespected the institution. One letter to the editor called him an ungrateful punk who bit the hand that fed him. But here's what the article didn't mention. 3 months later, Kurt started receiving letters from those students, dozens of them, then hundreds. Sarah, the art student who was going to drop out, had stayed in school and was applying to art colleges. Michael was standing up to his parents about marine biology. A girl named Jennifer wrote that she'd been planning to kill herself the week after graduation, but hearing Kurt's speech made her realize she wasn't alone. Kids who had been suicidal wrote that hearing someone successful admit to struggling, admit to sleeping under bridges and stealing food, we had made them feel less alone in their own pain. The speech that was supposed to celebrate Aberdeen High's most famous graduate became something else entirely. A referendum on how schools treat different kids, how adults fail students who need them most. Kurt never spoke at another graduation, but that one speech became legendary. Bootleg recordings circulated, zines printed transcripts. The message spread far beyond Aberdeen. You don't have to let the people who hurt you define what you become. 10 years after dropping out, Kurt went back and told the truth, not the sanitized version that makes everyone feel good, the real version that helps kids who are suffering. He didn't tell them everything would be okay. He told them survival is possible, differentness is valuable. And people who reject you are often just afraid of what they don't understand. For students who stayed and heard those words, it changed everything. Not because Kurt was famous, but because someone who had survived looked them in the eye and said, "You're not broken. You're just different, and different is exactly what the world needs."